Morning legends, I have to say I'm quite excited today because I'm jumping on my first flight since the pandemic started. It's been 5 months and it's been the longest break for me between flights since 2017. It's been exactly 5 months since I last flew. It was a Wizzair flight from St. Petersburg to London Luton at the time. It was the 17th of February. It's now the 17th of July and I'm flying from Bristol to Edinburgh. I have a long journey ahead of me, as once I get to Edinburgh, I'm also taking the bus to Inverness, where I'm going to isolate for the rest of the weekend. I'm really excited for it, so if you're curious about what it's like to fly during a pandemic, during the worst pandemic of the last 100 years, join me while I jump on this Easyjet flight from Bristol Airport to Edinburgh. And of course, even though Easyjet and Ryanair have started flying again, the flight frequency is still very much reduced. I think there are only 15 flights out of Bristol Airport today, so not that many. Of course, if you compare it to last year, even though that's a bit of an unfair comparison, since that was 2019, that was the busiest year in terms of aviation passengers in history. There is, of course, hand sanitizer everywhere, and I was actually surprised that I was allowed to take on board my hand sanitizer spray. I was already getting ready to having to throw it away in the trash, but the security guy was like, "Hey, you can take that one with you, so no big deal." I bought myself some food because I highly doubt that they're going to hand out any food while we're on the air. So of course you're expected to be wearing a mask, it's compulsory, and I'd say that I haven't seen a single person not wearing a mask. And this is unlike public transport such as trains or buses, for example, where in the UK it is of course compulsory to be wearing a face covering, but you still see from time to time the odd one out not wearing a mask. Whereas here in airports and on the plane, I guess too, I will see everybody complying with that, so that's a good thing. And also one other thing is there was the temperature screening upon entering the airport. I passed that, fortunately, and yeah, security went really smoothly. I think that was the first time actually that there was no rush at security and I could take all the time in the world, really. So good experience with that, and now I'm really looking forward to jump on a plane. The first plane that would take me up in the air after so long was a plain 11-year-old A320. It's such a weird feeling, really. It's been 5 months.
The cabin crew will be pleased to help. This is a no smoking flight. Please remember that your face mask or covering must remain in place for the duration of the flight.
My original seat was 15F, but since, as expected, the plane was nowhere near full capacity, I was able to lend myself a nice emergency exit seat with extra legroom. You're allowed to remove your face covering for eating and drinking.
In the event of a loss of cabin pressure, face masks can be removed for eating and drinking while seated, but must be placed back on immediately after you have finished. Please do not wipe down the tray tables or your sitting area. Specialist cleaning.
With took off 6 minutes earlier than the scheduled time, briefly crossing into Wales before heading north. We passed right between Liverpool and Manchester before crossing into Scotland across the spinal cord of Great Britain. I had never been on a UK domestic flight before, so I was surprised at the short duration of the flight. Not long after taking off, the flight deck announced that we would commence landing operations shortly and advised the crew to prepare accordingly. From a planned 1 hour and 25 minutes of flight time, we eventually landed in Edinburgh 56 minutes after taking off in the south of England. There definitely was very little time to sleep on this one. Even though the weather approaching Edinburgh wasn't the best, it was still fascinating to see us heading towards the North Sea and positioning for landing from the bay. This offered great views of the entire area surrounding Edinburgh. After a smooth landing, we immediately started taxiing towards the gate. Another sign of air traffic struggling to pick up is that it was really fast and not many planes were visible on the tarmac. I could only spot a couple of Jet 2 737s. I felt really sorry for them as they must be struggling more than others. Overall, flying and traveling during these times feel a little bit like when a football or basketball player returns from an injury and can play even though he's not going to be himself for some time. Traveling is, of course, as fun as ever, but just something doesn't feel right.
Good afternoon, Scotland.
Wow, I think this looks way busier than the airport in Bristol. Also gotta remember to collect my luggage, which is not something that I do very often. My bag was one of the first out on the carousel, so I was able to exit the airport quite fast and jump straight into the bus leaving towards the city centre. I was supposed to go there before boarding a coach to Inverness. I wasn't planning on spending time in Edinburgh anyway, as I had already been there.
Now the bad news is that it started raining here in Scotland. It started drizzling down. But the good news is that my flight was so early. It landed, I'd say, half an hour before the scheduled time, and now I can take the earlier coach to Inverness. I was thinking that I was going to take the coach at either 3 or 4 o'clock, which by the way was going to be the more expensive one. But since I arrived so early, I'm now going to jump on the bus leaving at 1:50, and with that I will arrive at Inverness at around 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was also £8 cheaper than the later ones. It's great because I'm going to arrive earlier and I'm spending less money. Great.
Goodbye, Edinburgh. It was short but intense. I now had a 4-hour bus journey ahead of me. When I booked the tickets after landing, Megabus was showing me that only 2 seats were left, but eventually there were only 6 people on the entire coach. Good old marketing. After an hour or so, the sky opened up to let the sun shine on the fascinating hills of the Scottish Highlands. Quite a few people jumped on the bus when we stopped in Perth, but still a majority of the seats were empty. About halfway through the journey to Inverness, we started venturing along the edge of the Cairngorms National Park, the largest of the British Isles, before making a stop in the tourist resort town of Aviemore. Half an hour later, and the industrial and residential scenes of Inverness started appearing. Life from my first glance appeared lax and chill on a Friday evening. The sun was as if it was about to set soon, but it would continue illuminating the narrow streets of Inverness for a few hours longer. And at last I made it. This is going to be my home for the next 3 days and 3 nights. Let's check out the bathroom here in my hotel in Inverness. This is really central Inverness, so I'm really happy with my hotel choice. Now, the thing is, the reason why I decided to come to Inverness is that I've always been fascinated by its location next to Loch Ness, but it's not just Loch Ness, but it's more about Inverness being located in such a remote part of Scotland, like so up north. I don't think I've ever been. I think it's on the same latitude as St. Petersburg, and I've been to St. Petersburg, so it's mind-boggling to me that I'm now at the same latitude. So I'm really happy that I made the choice to come here. I'm really glad that I had the chance, as hotels and pubs reopened just yesterday in Scotland. So I'm really curious to see what it's like. Of course, I will act as responsibly as I can, also taking into consideration the fact that originally I wanted to go even further. I wanted to go to Thurso, the Orkney Islands, because I wanted to reach the northernmost point of Scotland. But then I spoke a little bit with friends and people that I knew from Scotland, and I realized that it wouldn't have been really responsible. It would have been almost disrespectful to the locals there, because the areas of Thurso, Orkney, Shetland, they're just so remote, and probably their access to healthcare is not as extensive as it is in areas like Edinburgh, Glasgow, but even Inverness. So I figured that I definitely want to go there, but I figured that that will be for a later time. But Inverness is good enough for the moment. I had never been. I'm really excited to be here for the weekend. I have 2 full days before I go back to Edinburgh, as my flight back to Italy leaves from Edinburgh Airport right on Monday night. So I surely will keep you updated. At the same time, I cannot help but thanking you for joining me today. If you made this far, joining me while I took my first flight in 5 months. It's been a definitely weird feeling, but it felt great at the same time being back on the air after so many months, even though it definitely was a humbling experience, because flying is definitely not the same experience as it was before the pandemic started its rampage all over Europe. But I hope this shows that there are ways that we can travel, that we can still enjoy, maybe not to the fullest, but in a smaller part what we used to enjoy back in the day. And we can do that in ways that are safe and that are, most importantly, responsible. So once again, I will see you next time. Thank you again.